Hello and welcome to Plus One to Gaming. I'm Chris.
And I'm Eric.
And I'm Billy.
And today we are going to talk about how to play with a new player at your D&D table. Now, Billy, this is a topic that you've been wanting to talk about for a while. So do you want to kind of frame this for us a little bit or give us some context about this?
Sure. So a lot of times we talk about how you can maximize your gaming experience and how to play your character the best, or how to DM your adventure the best. But if you have a new player that is either DMing or playing in a campaign, not even that you're running, that you're just playing in, the game's all about interactions, and maximizing those interactions is key to having a fun time. And sometimes you really have to tiptoe on new players where you want to teach them, but you don't want to seem bossy or seem negative, and you don't want to scare them away, especially if it's like their first time playing. So I thought it may be a good idea to go over some of the ideas that we have on how to introduce new characters, introduce new players to the game, and then when the player is in the game, how to kind of guide them to playing their best, keep them from making mistakes, and if they do make mistakes, how to correct them in a positive and encouraging way.
Yeah, no, thank you for that context. I think I know this is a discussion we've all been excited to have. So let's dive into this. I think the first thing that we could jump into is first recognizing that taking on the DM role, especially for their first time, is a kind of intimidating experience. I mean, I felt that. Did you guys? Like your first time DMing a table?
Oh, absolutely. I was a little bit different. Is that when I was introduced to it, it was their first time playing. So I was overseas. Somebody said, "Hey, I have this book. You can borrow it if you want." And they didn't even play with us. The person that gave me the D&D 4th edition, which was a rough way to start.
Yeah.
But it was just like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing. I read the books, in the time when I had light, but it was still very scary, even playing against people that didn't know what they were doing. So like having your first time against, like, playing with players that have done it for years has to be terrifying.
Yeah. Eric, how did you feel your first time running a game?
I don't remember feeling... So we had played a few times when I ran my first. The first one I ran was the starter set. So it is specifically designed to be easier for both parties, the players and the DM. I don't remember necessarily feeling like super nervous about it. But it was like I had to be on constantly. And it's still true as a DM. Like, you don't get the time between rounds. Like, you have to pay attention every action, every reaction, everything that happens, you have to pay attention. So I do remember like getting a little overwhelmed the first time because I wasn't used to managing that stuff. I was very excited. Chris was there. Billy wasn't there because we were out here.
But we were playing the same game. We were just playing remotely. Is that what you mean? For the starter set?
No, I believe the first time I ran the starter set was without the group, was with Katie, Annie, and Chris A. and you. I believe so.
Oh, I thought it was the other way around.
Could have been. Who knows? They were very close to each other if they happened in whichever order. But like, I printed out maps. I had a ton of stuff, like tabletop stuff. So when I was like really, really excited about that, I know we've talked about it a ton of times of like what you're excited about kind of changes as you grow as a player and DM. But I was really excited about like making that type of like tabletop RPG-ish world for everybody. When I DM'd the starter set for all of you guys, I wasn't worried about it because it was all of you guys. Like, we've known each other since junior high. Like, it really wasn't that. I don't know, because I felt like if I had a question. So here's the other thing: I had a lifeguard. If I had a question, I could ask Bill. Like, what is this? And when I DM'd for my wife, her sister, and friends, they didn't. It was similar to Billy. Like, they didn't know what the hell was going on, so they totally trusted me to be the expert. And if I wasn't, they didn't. I figured they wouldn't know the difference.
That's interesting, because I think my first foray into DMing 5e was Adventurers League, when we started doing that.
Yeah.
And I was nervous because I wanted to, one, make sure that everyone was having a good time. Two, I was like, there's a lot to manage because the table sizes there can get quite large.
Yep.
And I think that's difficult, for a new DM to manage. But also too, like, making sure that I knew the rules and that could provide a consistent and reliable, experience, because in that environment you have to, you really are forced to play by the book. So I wanted to kind of bring this up because all of these things that we have experienced, I think, are pretty common. Like, Eric, you had a unique situation, where you were able to not have that anxiety, but you were also able to focus a lot on that preparation work.
Yeah.
And Billy, maybe you had the same, like, that desire, that anxiety of being able to provide an awesome experience while also managing all these rules and stuff. So these are kind of the themes that are going to be making up the crux of our conversation, like how to navigate things and also how to, like, channel these things too into giving each other feedback and keeping safe communication channels open, because, whether you're DMing or playing as a character, it can be a very vulnerable space, and receiving criticism can be difficult. And I think it's hard to be able to, I think giving good criticism in a good way is also a skill.
Yeah. So that is one of the things that, like, first of all, the first time I don't know if you heard Slack go off in the back, so I'll restart that sentence. First of all, the first time I DM'd, I was, like, well into my 30s. So, like, I had a false sense of confidence, if not just a regular sense of confidence. So I wasn't nervous about that stuff, but I was with a friendly audience too, both times. And that, you didn't have that luxury. You were, I won't want to speak for your age, but around the same age as me. But we didn't know when we went to Adventures League, like, what you're going to get.
Yeah.
So I was lucky, maybe luckier than Bill also, because I don't know who he was playing with his first time, but I knew I was low stakes.
Yeah, and I think that makes a big difference. Interestingly, though, I wonder, like, if we're at the Adventures League table and somebody gives me some feedback of the game, like, hey, the exposition part of this really kind of dragged on, I would be like, okay, thanks for letting me know. Like, I appreciate that, because I'm trying to manage all this stuff.
Yeah.
But, like, I wonder if hearing that from you guys, we've been friends for so long, I think it would be the same exact thing. But sometimes when it's like, when it is people that you're closer with, sometimes, like, I guess maybe delivered in the incorrect way,
yeah,
could maybe, like, hurt a little bit more, sting a little bit more, or maybe just, like, wear your confidence down a little bit. And that's not the spirit of this conversation. We want to be able to talk about, like, how can we all just pull each other along, really.
Mm-hmm. And so I don't know the course of this conversation, but I think that is the theme of it. Whether you, and I think it's one of the themes that we touch on a lot, whether you are new DM or a veteran, new player or veteran, pulling each other along makes this game go smoother no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about providing feedback. I'd just be curious, with your personal perspectives, how in this context, how would you go about providing feedback for, things that you would want to, I guess if we look at it, it's like you want to try and modify someone's behavior, right? That's the purpose of feedback. So, like, how would you go about doing that in a way that's, I don't want to say with kid gloves, but is, like, a positive and is in that spirit of, like, pulling each other along? How would you manage that?
Do you want to answer that, Bill?
I mean, changing behavior, I guess that is the ultimately what we're trying to do, but I see it more as like guiding, um, especially a newer player, like kind of assisting them along the path of whatever they're doing. So whether it's character development or actual like role playing or anything like that, it's more of nudging them if you see them going off course, you know, because you have a little bit more experience and you can kind of see the pitfalls before they happen, and that's ultimately what I think you're trying to do is changing behavior, yes, but more like steering somebody that you see is starting to go off course that could impact, you know, their playing experience, the other people's playing experience, and trying to do it early enough before it becomes an issue and positive enough to be like, hey, like I saw that you were doing this. You know, maybe I've noticed in my games when I do that, you know, it's an easy rabbit hole to go down to, but this is kind of the way that I do to avoid it, and things like that. You know, I think, I mean, we're talking all about, you know, ultimately, I would say like leadership skills of how to guide people and train people and teach people in a positive way. And I think there's no one way to do things, just like there's no one way to be a leader. You know, in the real world, I think ultimately you just have to know your group of friends and see if somebody is going to, like, you know, if they are going to be bothered by you, like correcting them on something that's a non-issue, or somebody that is just going to, oh, I don't care about that stuff, you know, or somebody that will like be hard on themselves if, you know, if they play this character for 5, you know, sessions, and it turns out they've been doing this thing wrong all 5 sessions. Like, are they going to blow over it? Are they going to be like, no big deal? If it really doesn't matter, are they going to shoot, you know, beat themselves up and feel like embarrassed and like, oh man, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that. Oh man, if I knew that, I wouldn't have done that, type of thing. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, yeah, and it is. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with like it really is. It's about communication, and like, so communicating is a two-way street. It's the sender and the receiver. I can only control one of those as a sender, and or as a receiver. I can't control the other person. So you have to. I mean, I think like we've talked about this. This is the solution to a ton of our problems. Like, you got to talk about this stuff beforehand. You got to have a session zero. You have to know the people you're playing with, because very easily, like, even if it's like, I don't know, I don't feel like I ever would get hung up on or angry about if you guys corrected me on like a rule or something. It was like, oh shit, all right, my bad, I was wrong. But I feel like people would be a lot more tied to the way that they like role play their character rather than like the mechanics of the game if they aren't understanding or know it very well. And to tell somebody like, you're playing wrong, like, we don't like the way you play this game, is like, that is a much harder conversation.
Yeah, because like there are rules. You can look at that and say, yes, this is the, you know, by the rule, or it is not. But
yeah,
you're doing
but
it like,
if we've got somebody like being a jerk to NPCs or like murder hoboing or just like doing all the things that we have been guilty of doing ourselves at several times, but we've gotten past that. Like, we're jumping into this person's first time. You got to watch out for those pitfalls.
yeah,
And that's going to be a much harder conversation to keep egos unbruised of like, we don't do that here, kind of thing.
yeah. So this is another topic I wanted to dive into with regards to this conversation, is sort of like, in the spirit of pulling each other along and elevating each other, we want to make sure that, you know, these fledgling adventurers aren't making any mistakes. But at the same point too, like, one thing that I've been learning about in some of my like physical movement practice is, like, sometimes we kind of do need to struggle a little bit and sort of make some mistakes. And in teaching, and also like as we teach each other, some of it's just like it's threading the needle of knowing when to step in and try and course correct, and when to just kind of back off a little bit and let stuff happen, and then maybe reflect on it afterwards. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, but my response, I guess, would be like, when you are by yourself or doing something solo and you make a mistake, you learn better from mistakes than somebody just telling you ahead of time. But something like D&D, like your mistakes, if they keep happening, and mistakes again for this is like playing a character quote unquote wrong, you're affecting everybody else.
Oh yeah.
So
Context matters.
Context matters. So it's much harder, because I agree, like, yeah, let them fail. But I would say let them fail, like, if they're like, because Billy has done this to us in the past when we had no clue what we were doing. He like led us to a graveyard and there was some warlock or something, and we're like, oh, we can beat him because we're at this part of the game, so we should be able to beat things. And he kicked our dicks in. Like, let them make that mistake. Like, yes, they should know that this is a dangerous world, and they need to learn that lesson.
I think that was the first time we burned down a church.
May have been.
Yeah.
I think that was the first game I ever played.
It's not the first building we burned down in our adventures, but
it's not the last.
No, it was the first. It definitely was not the last.
It is not the last. No. Yeah.
But that was a lesson Billy let us learn.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Is that the main way to teach lessons is to have consequences of actions, and make those consequences relate and be to scale. Like, don't kill off a character because he's being a little annoying, but you can have the shopkeeper give him worse deals or something like that. Like, in game, like, have to, like, if your character is kind of being that edgelord, he's the new guy. It's like, oh, I'm a rogue, I'm going to do all this stuff. You're like, if you do that in town, people are going to dislike you, and there will be consequences from that. And you tell them that beforehand, like, in a way, like, hey, you remember, like, I know you're an edgy rogue, but we're in town. There could be some negative consequences to some of these actions. Even if you're not the DM, just like tell him in character, like, play as your guy, like, hey, Raven Hawk, whatever his edgelord rogue name is.
It would probably be Ravenhawk.
It would probably be Ravenhawk. Hey, Ravenhawk, like, we need to get these townsfolk on our side. Like, we can't have them. We already have enough struggles with whatever the Lich King. We can't make the whole town against us. Kind of, hint in character that, like, don't go around and be a jerk. And even have responses to your characters, like, in game. It takes a lot less. I think having role playing those corrections is easier because it's not coming from me, your friend. It's coming from this character I'm playing, I'm role playing. So, like, if you're being an asshole, my character is going to be mad at you. I won't be mad at you, but I'm just like, hey, like, I may not heal you, or I may not jump in to protect you next time something bad happens, like, in game. And say, I don't know, that's one way that I could see letting them fail, having those consequences of the actions, where you're not like, oh, he's dead, or I'm not going to play with you anymore. Just like, let them, let that scene play out how you think it would play out if they were doing that. And maybe they'll get the hint.
Yeah, I think that is a great way of doing it. Instead of me saying, hey, knock that shit off, like, my character warning their character, it's immersive, first of all, which is what we all want, but it can be seen more of like there's less ego bruise. Whether or not it'll work, who knows? But there's less ego bruise.
Yeah, I think, like, if you have player conflicts like that, I think the first thing your go-to conflict resolution thing is to resolve it in character if you can, or at least attempt to.
I agree, but you also said something, or you started to, like, again, a lot of this can be solved in a session 0 where we talk about like what we want to do, what are our goals, it being a dangerous world, like those types of things, because that's something we did not do in my first game. And I modeled my character after a World of Warcraft rogue. I was surprised I couldn't turn invisible because that's what, the rogues I was familiar with did. So like, if you're having a new player, they are going to have misconceptions about what this game is. And if we correct those before the game, like, actually, no, this is how this works. This is how we like to play it. We play together. It's not a solo game, blah, 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 blah. That's easier to get ahead of those problems than it is to head them off later.
Yeah, definitely. Eric, I wanted to, we got Billy's take, but I wanted to get your take on providing constructive or critical feedback. I think by the nature of your job, like, you maybe have to do this. So do you have any things that you could share for those of us who don't do it don't deliver some bad news professionally?
It's tough. So again, like I keep talking about like the bruising of egos, because what you don't want to do is have the person shut down and not take any feedback, period. Mm-hmm. So it is, again, it's all about communication, and I can only control my side of it. So I can't control the way they listen to it. One of the tactics that I use in my job is like, we are on the same side. We literally are. We are working for the same company. We are on the same adventuring team, whatever it may be. So it is not a me versus you. It is a us versus this issue. And even just me remembering that and like framing that in my discussion does change the vocabulary I use. Like it changes the way I talk. And that can influence the way that they talk or the way that they receive it. Because again, I can't control that. There is a relatively famous technique called like the compliment sandwich. So if I have something, a criticism, an opportunity, something negative to say, generally you sandwich it between two compliments or two things that they've done well. Like, hey, I really like your character name, Ravencrow Never Smiles. That's awesome. Maybe don't harass the townspeople because you're going to get us in trouble. Also, like, you did really well here. Like, it softens the blow on both ends and makes them more receptive to feedback, rather than saying like, hey, just don't do that. Because then they're going to shut down. They're going to get mad. They're either not going to want to play, not going to have any fun, or just keep doing it because they know that you don't like it.
Yeah. We also known as the shit sandwich.
Yeah. Compliment sandwich is a little more PC than shit sandwich, but yes.
Yeah. In the military, we referred to them as shit sandwiches, where they were not PC enough to call it something better, but PC enough to throw in some compliments.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but I mean, they teach you that in like any management, anything, like, and it's because it is very cliche, but it really does work, especially if you mean all three of the things. If you're really searching for like a second compliment, like, they're gonna feel it.
Maybe just leave it open face in that case.
Yes. But yeah, so I mean, it's really hard because like we are lucky. We get to play with the people we like. I know your temperaments and your personality, so we can even go a little deeper and talk shit about each other. Like we're long friends. Like we can talk about like, Billy likes to make suboptimal characters and I don't agree with that, and I like to make these types of characters and Billy thinks that that's not, like, we can razz each other with it a little bit. If you are at an adventurers league, like, so that's where I'm trying to, because the conversation would be so short if it was just us. Be like, oh, just fucking tell them, like, quit being a bitch. But if we're at Adventures League and I don't know this person's temperament, from my experience with the people I worked with at Adventurers Leagues, they're not great temperaments. These aren't the most well-adjusted people I've ever played with. So you really do have to, I mean, you said it earlier, like kid gloves, but you really have to monitor your projection. And a lot of times, like, is it worth it? Like, I don't want to, Chris, you started talking a little bit about like, let them make mistakes, you don't want to like side seat drive this person everything. Like that's
Right.
going to be no fun.
And that's what I was
for,
getting at.
for either of you. Yeah. You got to let them make mistakes, but this, I don't know, the stuff that making mistakes is fine. The stuff that drives me crazy is like the misanthropic edgelord that doesn't play by the rules and isn't group oriented. And you're like, cool, go play Doom. Like that's not this. But that again can be head off out of session 0.
Definitely. So speaking of session 0, it's a great way to like prep, and it gives the DM some material to work with. But also I want to talk about preparation generally as a new player. I mean, I know when I first started DMing, particularly for Adventures League, I really wanted to provide a good experience. That was something that I like had on my checklist. And I thought in order to do that, I needed to have all the maps and tokens, and all these, just making sure that I had everything memorized or note cards and like a really good system in place. And it was a lot of work. And I was like freelancing at the time. So like any time I was spending not working was also time like I wasn't earning money. Anytime I was spending on D&D was time I was not earning money.
Yeah.
So of course I prioritized D&D because it was way more fun. But all that to say is I think sometimes when you're coming in new, preparation kind of gets in the way, like over preparation can sometimes get in the way. And what I mean by this is I know personally speaking, I had all these different plot points and things that I wanted, especially when I started writing my own campaigns, that I wanted the characters to go through. And you plan so much and you put all this effort into it, and one of two things can happen. You can either recognize that the party's always going to zag, or you're going to try and railroad the players into this experience you wanted them to have, and it's forced, or there's just like a ton of exposition, or things. It's not fun for the players.
Yeah.
And if you're DMing, the players aren't having fun, then course correction is definitely in order.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really the only way that you can play the game poorly is people aren't having fun. That's literally the only way you can play it bad.
I agree 100%.
Yeah. So it's just I wanted to kind of acknowledge that preparation is not don't use it as a crutch. Like it's not going to over preparation does not a great experience make.
Yes, on the DM side, but this is for new. I mean, are we talking about new players being DMs too?
Yeah, I think just new players in general on both sides of the coin, or both sides of the table, rather.
I think that's two different conversations that could easily both be an hour long.
Okay.
Those are both big things, because I think as a player, know your stuff. Like if you get into a game and you don't know what your spells do, or like you don't know this character, even like their personality, stuff grinds down. And like I again agree, like the best way to have fun, or the best way to play the game, is to have fun, or the only way to not play it correctly is to not have fun. It is not fun to sit there and look through like spell cards and whatever. Like once you get into this character and you know who they are, you can kind of just like freeball it and just like go through you are the character at that point, and you only get there by like prepping and knowing. Now on the character side, or on the player side, doesn't take that much. Like it's not nearly as much prep as like a DM would have to do, because you're only prepping the character and like the spells and stuff. You're not prepping the world. But I do think if I were talking to a new player, I would tell them, know your character sheet. Like no excuse to not. You wrote it. Know it.
And to be able to like, because I think one of the places where it really just gets super grindy is that like when you're in combat and they're trying to make a decision and they're sifting through their details of their character sheet, and then they're trying to figure out what dice to roll.
Yeah.
And so if you can, in this process as a diligent new player, have those things kind of already written out, the character sheet has them typically are like spots for them where you can like write out your attack rolls. But even if you have to have some like accessory cards, just make the important information accessible to you, know it well, and That way it really does free you up so you can pay attention to what's happening versus to what's on your sheet.
Exactly. That 100%. If you know the stuff on your character sheet, you then get to think of the higher level stuff of what would my character think? How would they react? Different things like that, rather than what's my AC? How hard do I move? Like, you should know that stuff. Or at least know when it's important to check. Because very often I will ask, like, how the fuck do I figure out passive perception? But, know what's important.
Yeah.
With that preparation, you also want to prepare before the session, not before your turn, because a lot of new players get in the habit of, as soon as it's the end of their turn, they nose down into the books, nose down into their cards, and they're not paying attention to what's actually going on with everybody else. And then it comes back up like, oh, it's your turn. It's like, okay, what happened again? Like they weren't paying attention. They were looking through to figure out what the best thing to do is, and that is not the time to prepare. So
yes,
like, think about what you're doing beforehand, like during other people's turns. Don't wait till your turn to look into it, but don't be so involved and so focused on maximizing your next turn that you are not paying attention to what's going on, because those things could change what you're doing your next turn. Have a few options. Like, once you know your character, okay, what are they going to do? Oh, this came up. And then you just know the main things is the main stats you need to know. And then you won't have to keep referencing them. Like, every once in a while, you'll have to reference something that you don't do very often. But I mean, the character sheet's one page. If you know where it is, someone says, hey, I need you to do an athletics check, you should be able to look down in 2 seconds and give me the number.
Yeah. Yeah, familiarize yourself with it for sure. Because it is different from, anything. You've never dealt with something like this in any other game, really. So know where stuff is. And there's tons of stuff online. We've done stuff on the character sheet and describing it for new players. Go back and watch our videos if you have a question about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, is just look at a blank character sheet and just start getting familiar with how the information is laid out if you're a new player. And then, makes it just like, when you have that, oh, I need to find this information, you always have a place to go. Yeah, well, there's another skill that I wanted to talk about, and it's one that I think really takes a lot of practice, and it's reading the table. Because it just requires... It's also it's more difficult too, given remote, all our play is remote now.
Yeah.
And it's how do you read a table when we also don't see each other?
Impossible. So I would say impossible, but again, I don't know, because some people are going to be very vocal if they're unhappy with you. If you make a move that makes their lives or game or job or game harder, I think a lot of people would just tell you, they would grumble vocally over the Discord or whatever. Obviously, these things are pretty easy to pick up when you're in person, which most of us aren't now, but some people don't have that, I don't know if it's emotional intelligence or just being able to read the room type thing. A lot of people don't have that skill. And if you're on top of that, trying to figure out this whole new thing that you're doing, that skill that you do have may lower a little bit, but it's definitely something I pay attention to.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't in every day I'm a people pleaser. I do not do well with conflict, and I don't want to drive it in the real world.
I think most people who play D&D are probably fall in that character. That characterization. Sure, you're always going to get assholes, but in general, D&D is getting more popular, but it's still kind of played by, the nerdier people, maybe people without the strongest social skills. I don't want to. I think we're pretty good at recognizing social cues, but that is as a player, it may be you may be doing it yourself and the table a disservice if you don't like rocking the boat. And I do it a lot, and I think we can I mean, talk about just with our friends. I don't want to correct anybody. I don't want to tell anybody they're doing a bad job or that I'm getting bored. And
Yeah.
and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, because not only do I not want to rock the boat, but I care about and love everybody that I'm playing with. So that is a very hard thing to do, but I may be doing them a disservice.
Yeah.
So I think it may be a responsible thing to do is pull a Futurama robot devil and just say your emotions out loud.
That makes me angry.
That makes me angry. But so I do agree. I like where you're going with that. Like they have to learn their own lesson, but like if there's no one to teach that lesson or no like repercussions, that lesson doesn't, like, the bad actions get reinforced. Like, okay, this works. This is how this game plays because no one's telling me otherwise.
Yeah.
Either DM or player.
I would say though, like I would be hesitant to maybe use the word like bad or good, but maybe just like what's right for you or for the table or for the enjoyment of the table.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've been trying to get away from like those kind of like those qualities because they're not as helpful. I also want to like at some point too, just with the widespread adoption and rising popularity of D&D, like I do hope we can get past kind of like the stereotypical like nerd portrayal of this, because I also don't think it's super helpful to the community. Even though like those stereotypes do exist and we recognize them, it's like at some point we could also choose to stop perpetuating them too. Yeah,
I mean, I think that it's way more popular than it was. I was saying that if you're very likely to encounter somebody that doesn't have social skills if you play D&D. That was the point? Is that it is?
And if you play softball, like I work with 20% of the people I work with don't like. I wouldn't say have as good of social skills as I do. Like I feel like I'm maybe a little better than average, if we're looking at like the bell curve, and so a little more than half is, I would say, not as like, I don't know the better word than good as me, but like you deal with this everywhere. You know, people have different levels of emotional intelligence, and you have to compensate for that in your communication.
Absolutely. So if you're trying to read the table and you don't have these skills, I think some good cues for you to look for, like how can you actually put this into action? Are your players, are their noses buried in the books? Are they not engaging with the NPCs in the dialogue? Are they not engaging in the story? Are they not looking for stuff? You know, those are some of the things you can look for. Are they answering as the player and not their character? You know, like look for some of the things that they're doing that might show they're not having a great time as maybe some fingers in the wind to know if you need to check in.
Yeah. So that is interesting because I feel like I've gotten a little off base. We are looking for tools for existing like veteran players to help new players.
Yeah, I mean,
make a smoother transition, not necessarily for, hey, here is a new player's guidebook. So if you are a veteran player, you need to be looking for those things. Like you just said, is this person's nose in the book? Are they on their phone? Are they having fun? Like we need to, as veterans, like guide them down a smoother path than the one we had.
Yeah.
That is our job.
Yeah. And then yes, absolutely. I also think it's true if you're a new player DM and you're running the game and you see this behavior manifest and you don't know how to, you don't really have those kind of, you don't feel like you'd have those maybe social quality or those social skills. You know, those are just some like tactical ways that you can look for. But even for veteran players too, absolutely.
Yeah, because again, veteran players like with good social skills, sometimes you just get wrapped up. You know, like when you're focused on 6 things at once, like a lot of things can fall out of the back of your brain, and reading a table could be one of those very easily. So yeah, those are very good. Like, here are the signs of this.
Yeah. Another one that I really try to keep an eye out for is like if I'm DMing, is just like spreading the spotlight around. Like when in terms of like checking in, I'm keeping an eye out of who's having, those engagements. And even as a player, like when I'm playing, and I'll use the game we're playing, A Deep and Creeping Darkness as an example. Billy's playing a character that has like communication, like handicap. I'll say, like, he doesn't speak the language, and nobody can understand. Very few people understand Gomorian, and he's a barbarian. So as a player, I'm just kind of like sensitive to that, and I always want to try and like I've been trying to make sure that I ask up questions and like bring him into the story, because sometimes I feel like because of those things, it could feel lost. And like and Billy is such a great player and brings such richness to any game we play. Like I don't want that to happen, because like you're my teammate, you're my guy, you're my best friend. Like I want you, So it's like those types of things too.
Yeah, that's a really good technique that I've noticed you use, because there will be times that like you and I will just be talking and you'll be like, hey, what do you have? What do you have to say about this? Asking to engage another character. So as a veteran player, like that should be part of what you focus on. Like look for ways to bring in and let these newer players shine.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can do it with not just in like role playing. Like if you're a veteran player and they're new, they're going to be a little bit shyer in general, and they're not going to talk as much. And so it may seem like you're kind of driving the conversation, you're driving the role play. And so I think what Chris said of just checking in every now and then with them, my character is silent based on his character traits, but you could have a new player that's just silent. Like we do that to, like, Mark doesn't talk as much when we play. And so I noticed that you've done it too, is check with Mark, just to make sure that he doesn't feel like he's just being a passenger in this train of where it's going. He's not just following the leaders. And I think you can go even a step further than not just like asking them how they are, but like purposely using your character to get them involved. Like if you know that they're a new player and you can see that they're not having a lot of fun, like you're in that combat, give them the alley-oop, give them, make your action support their character. You have the aid action. You can do something like, oh, I'm going to push him over to you. And then like in character, like, oh, hit him with your best shot, like let him have a heroic moment of, instead of just trying to do it as optimally as possible, like let him slam that basketball in terrible sports,
Yeah, we're running out of sports analogies.
Yeah, we are. I don't know a whole lot about sports ball, but I know that was a good analogy, because that's also, it's not only a great way to get them involved, but then it's just good team bonding too.
Mm-hmm.
It's always cool. Like when I watch we've been watching a lot of Avengers movies and, like Cobra Kai, all the like team combination stuff. It's dynamic. It's cool. Like you want to set up cool combos with your team in combat. Like it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is not a single player game.
Yes.
So having the mentality, like Bill mentioned, of like, I want to kill this because it's the most efficient thing. I want to use my turn most efficiently. Like a lot of times is the right choice.
Yeah.
But it's if we are veteran players trying to coax or ease a new player into it, the alley-oop is that, like you said, it's going to create a hero moment. It's going to bunch of dopamine hits. They're going to fall in love with the game and, be lifelong players.
Yeah. All right. Well, in the spirit of time, because Eric, I know you got to go soon. I thought we could close out with, based on what we talked about, what as I guess I feel kind of like a slightly pretentious of saying like we're veteran players, but we've been playing for a long time and we've got a podcast, so fuck yeah, we're veterans. And Billy and I are actual veterans, so
burn.
Screw y'all. Dunk. But
I'm a veteran. I played it while I was deployed, so
yeah,
double veteran.
I'm a veteran squared.
Heck yeah. But based off of what we've talked about, what would we do? What do we want to do better moving forward in terms of helping, not just Mark, who is our, I guess, token new player, But even
Yeah.
just like what we talk about and what we'd want to share with, our audience, as veteran players, like to give them, like, what do we want to do better? I guess I'll go first. I want to try not to hold back on some of that constructive feedback when I think it could be doing them a disservice, like what Billy said before. I hope I didn't just take yours.
You took all of ours.
Fuck.
I'll go first with the most obvious and take all your things.
All right, that was a dick move. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that's for me that's going to be also the hardest one because again, like we said, like I'm adverse to calling, not even really calling people out because that has a negative connotation. Like it's really hard to give constructive feedback. It is just very, very hard. It is a skill that I actively try to work on for my job and still don't am adverse to doing it. So like, because that's so multifaceted.
It really is.
But yeah, I mean, I would say definitely that, and mixed with just being aware of what they're doing and kind of smoothing their transition as much as possible. I think just awareness, being on the same team and coming at it from that angle rather than hey, you're doing this wrong. Again, it's not me versus you, it's us versus the problem. Just having that mindset and taking it into these types of scenarios helps smooth those conversations.
I think that the way you frame that is, I think that's a really good perspective. I like that. Billy, what about you?
I think as veteran players, we kind of have the responsibility to not leave the game up to the DM. So we need to take a little bit more of an active peer leadership role without kind of becoming, I don't want to say forceful. Like you don't want to lead from the front kind of a way that take ownership. Yeah, pay attention to the players, pay attention to the DM. Don't be afraid to get a little bit more involved. Step the DM aside when you guys are taking your chip break. You just be like, hey man, I've noticed that Todd's doesn't seem like he's having a lot of good time. What do you what do you want to do? Kind of talk to the DM about it or things like that. Take the initiative where even if you don't have to do criticism, just don't count on other people to solve the problem, or it's the DM's game. If he has a problem with it, he'll correct it. It's not the DM's game. It's everyone's game.
Yeah. And, I think we're in an interesting position because we record and post our games, but having the ability to go back and listen to both your plays and your DMing, it's really interesting because I definitely learn so much from you guys all the time, but then also just learning about the missteps that I would have taken or the things that I would have done differently. It is, I think, so rare to have your games in this format saved. And I'm actually really one of the things that I love and I appreciate about this podcast is actually having a record of our plays. This is something that I treasure because I have so much fun with you guys, but it's also just a great learning tool to be able to kind of pick up on things and reflect. So I guess all that to say, I want to be more aware of the things that I learn, and it's not a negative thing. I could have done this in a different way, or just finding positive things to take from it and being able to share that with each other too. Because, it's like we said in the beginning, it's all about boosting each other up.
Yeah. I do want to add one thing is that we're talking about veteran gamers and how they have this responsibility, but I don't want to put us on a pedestal like you were talking before. People that have played for longer does mean that they are 100% right. I've played for going on, I don't know, 13 years now, and I forgot barbarians can't rage in heavy armor.
I savage! How dare you?
Yeah, and so my character in Deep and Creaking Darkness is broken. He shouldn't be able to do that. He's wearing heavy armor, and
And you got on me about using a shield as a rogue.
Yeah, because I mean, if somebody would have corrected me, that would have been nice, because I don't really play barbarians a lot, and I knew that they couldn't wear heavy armor, so I made the heavy armor feat. But like in the rage skill description, it literally says if wearing light or medium armor before anything. So none of that happens if you're wearing heavy armor. So I mean, everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
So when I'm trying to correct somebody, I think about like, would I want to be corrected on this? Is this nitpicking, or is this being a good friend to be like, hey, this guy didn't catch this rule? Like correcting Chris on not being able to wear a shield. If I was me and I wore the shield, I'm like, oh, damn it, I shouldn't have been able to wear this the whole time. Luckily, I only raged one time and I didn't get hit.
That all shakes out in the wash.
Yeah, so I have ways to correct it so I'm not overpowered. If there's any question, I'm usually underpowered purposefully, as we've talked about it. So I always err on the side of nerfing myself. But yeah, that's the constructive criticism thing, is how would I want to be brought about? I mean, everybody always talks about it. That's like the simplest way to think about it, but it's the most effective. Is this worth correcting? Like if somebody corrected something, would I like roll my eyes and be like, okay, I get it, big deal? Or is just like, oh shit, man, thanks for telling me. Like I completely missed this one very important line, and that's not just for veteran players, that's for everybody.
100%. Absolutely. And it kind of put another thought into my head. Like, the way we play, we're not like, yes, we use the rules, but if you've listened to this podcast, we're not rules lawyers. Things fall through the cracks. Sometimes we should have rolled with a disadvantage when we didn't, and that's fine, because our emphasis is more on the interactions with each other and in the game. So it's also like one thing to keep in mind, like at your table, how much, to Billy's point, really weigh those things and determine the impact of it on the game and whether or not it's worth, bringing up. Sometimes it's like bring it up and it's like, yeah, we're just going to pass on it. It could be as easy as that. Yep.
Again, session 0, you can figure that stuff out.
Yeah, check out that episode if you haven't already. We'll also be live streaming our discussions and live plays on Twitch from now on. So if you want to tune in live, follow us at twitch.tv/+1togaming. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.